Last weekend in Houston, Texas, a music festival took place called Astroworld. It was put on by a rap artist named Travis Scott. I hadn't heard of him before this story broke, but he's a very famous rap artist, and he has a very famous girlfriend named Kylie Jenner. So at Astroworld, there were too many people there. And what ended up happening was that 8 people lost their lives, actually nine, but originally 8 people lost their lives because they were crushed essentially by the crowd because there were just too many people there. There weren't enough crowd control measures. Several people ended up in the hospital, some in ICU. One of those later died. So a couple days ago, the reason I'm making this video is because a couple days ago, a ninth death was announced of a 22-year-old named Bhati. And as I was watching the press conference live, some of her family members made statements. And when her mom spoke, my heart, it broke. I started crying. The same way that I cried when I found out that my mom had breast cancer. My heart was breaking. Her family talked about, Bhati's dog Blue, this husky, that was her baby. And nobody else in the family really knows how to take care of Blue like she knew how to take care of him. And they talked about how every day they come home and he's looking for her. And my point is, a lot more people and things were impacted by this catastrophic event than just the people that were directly there and traumatized. The families, their friends, people like me that had never heard of Travis Scott that are listening to these stories, and animals. Thousands and thousands of people have been impacted by this traumatic event, as well as animals. I want to take a minute to acknowledge the families of the people that died, of the 9 people that died, and acknowledge the people that were injured and that are traumatized, that are suffering in any way from this story. And most of all, not to minimize anything else, little 9-year-old Ezra, who remains in the intensive care unit at the hospital in Texas. He's 9 years old. His father brought him to the concert. He was on his dad's shoulders. He fell and he was trampled. My prayers go out to him and his family. I want to make a quick note that I've seen so many comments on social media blaming Ezra's dad. Why would you take your son, your 9-year-old son, to a concert? And shaming him and blaming him. And so I just want to take a minute. If I was in the same room as Ezra's dad, I would tell him, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. It isn't. And you don't deserve that. You're already suffering enough. And the fact that unsafe conditions were present because people dropped the ball, they didn't care, that's not on you. So I hope that those comments aren't making things worse for you and your family. That said, there's this Native American story, and it's about 3 sisters. And the story goes, there's these 3 sisters walking in a field, and they come across a river. And they see a bunch of babies floating and struggling in this river. And so the first sister jumps in, and she starts scooping as many babies out of this river as she can and putting them on land and saving them. And the second sister jumps into the river. She starts teaching these babies how to swim. And the third sister walks up the river to where it starts to find out where these babies are coming from in the first place, to see how she can make them stop. which one of these sisters did the right thing? And so my answer is they all did the right thing. It's just a matter of what is the most effective way to get these babies to stop coming down the river, and how can we save these babies? And I think that this story can very well be applied to Astroworld and what took place there, because, you know, there were people in the crowd and they were drowning. I mean, they were literally on the ground being trampled on. They were suffocating. They couldn't breathe, just like somebody who's underwater wouldn't be able to breathe. And you have the first sister, which we can, compare to some of the attendees and security guards pulling people out of the crowd. Definitely not enough and not quick enough, but we have some people pulling these people out of the crowd, which is like the first sister pulling the babies out of the river. Then we have the second group, which is, people who come and they somehow, they have the ability to keep standing up, or they somehow, hold others up, or they're able to, teach the babies how to swim. We'll say they're able to in some way help other people, get them up off the ground onto their feet and be in a position to make sure that they don't fall back down or whatever. So they're helping. And then there's obviously others, and this is outside the story, that didn't help at all. I'm referring to the people that did. And then the third sister, goes up the river to find out where are these babies coming from. And I think that is what we need to look at here, which is, where did this catastrophe come from? What is the root cause of this? And the root cause, I think there's a couple, but poor planning, a complete disregard for the safety of the attendees, and money, turning a blind eye to the suffering of others, creating unsafe, dangerous conditions for them because it's profitable. It's just so unacceptable. And I don't usually like to obsess about things like this, but I just, after seeing Bhati's family and what her parents were saying and what her sister said, and there was a young man who spoke to, I don't know if it was her cousin or her brother. After hearing what they said, I couldn't get these thoughts out of my mind. And I feel like the only way for me to heal from the sadness that I felt is to talk about it. So there's also another thing I want to talk about, which is that I think another root cause, or along the same lines, is just the lack of accountability. I've seen a lot of comments or videos about acknowledging Travis Scott's apology, but I personally haven't seen an apology, because an apology is saying I'm sorry, right? The terms I'm sorry, and saying I'm sorry for such and such and such, taking accountability. This is the role that I played in this situation. I apologize for that. I could do better. I don't see any executives from Live Nation coming forward and saying I'm sorry. We dropped the ball and we created unsafe conditions. And you guys deserved better. I don't see that happening. I don't see executives from, the security companies that were contracted to to send security officers to this event. I don't see them apologizing for doing a bad job at training the people that were supposed to be there. I don't see anybody apologizing. I don't see anybody taking accountability for this. And the families and the victims, they deserve better. I mean, they deserve for somebody to look at them, whether it's through TV screen or to their face, and say, I'm really sorry that I dropped the ball. And I'm really sorry that this happened, because I could have done better. And they knew that they could have done better. I mean, I watched the Netflix documentary on Travis Scott, and in it, you see his security team, you see executives from the promotion companies talking about crowd crushing and how dangerous it is. I mean, they're blatantly on the screen talking about exactly what happened at this show. They knew that this was a possibility. They knew this could happen. They've talked about it, and it still happened. And that's because they didn't take the steps that they needed to take to make sure that the conditions were safe enough for this not to happen. That's why it happened, right? And Travis Scott plays a huge role in that, since this is his event. I mean, presumably he signs off on things because he created Astroworld, right? So the question of whether or not he's on stage and he can see people dying or he can see the suffering, which, I mean, let's be real, like, it definitely looks like he had some idea, but I am not him. Innocent till proven guilty. Let's just say that he didn't see people in the crowd suffering while he was on stage performing. He still had a duty to work with his security teams to make sure that the conditions at the concert were safe, especially considering in the past he's been arrested a couple times for intentionally creating unsafe conditions at his concerts. This is nothing new to him. So, the root issue here is that his team and Travis Scott had awareness of the dangers, and they did not take the steps necessary to prevent this from happening. I mean, that's just the bottom line. That's undeniable, and they really owe the people that went to the concert, the families that have been affected, and the public who's hearing these stories and, having their own trauma triggered. They owe all of us an apology for doing that. They need to take accountability. Instead, they're allowing lawsuits to pile up. They're going to drag these families to court. They're going to, force people to be on juries. They're not going to be able to go to work, and they're just going to argue it out, like who's right, who's wrong, who's responsible, who's not, when the reality is they should just be apologizing, taking accountability, and working with the families to make sure that their needs are met and that they get what they need to get through the rest of their lives, so that this catastrophe doesn't ruin their lives. I mean, it's gonna ruin their lives on a spiritual and emotional level, right? But I'm talking about tangible things right now. So they really need to step up and tell the families, we care and we want to work with you to make sure that your needs are met, because we screwed up and we want to make this right. Nobody is saying that. Travis Scott's lawyer made a statement that all this finger pointing is going on, right? And that it needs to stop. But then, a day or two later, this woman goes on TV, she's his spokesperson, and she talks about how there's this 59-page manual that addresses security at the event, and that only 2 people were allowed to stop the concert, and that Travis Scott had absolutely no authority to stop the concert at all. And so that's finger pointing. She's saying that, she's pointing the finger and she's saying they're the ones that needed to stop this concert, not him. So it's just really interesting to me that his lawyer is saying we need to stop the finger pointing, but then his spokesperson is pointing the finger. And that's what we call gaslighting. They're gaslighting us. And it's not okay. It's emotionally abusive to the public to lie to us the way that they're lying, to escape accountability in the way that they're escaping accountability. I think that, like I said earlier, it boils down to money at the end of the day. In the documentary I referenced earlier, Travis Scott is showing off his diamonds, his gold. That's what he values. That is what he cares about. I mean, the inauthenticity is just whoa. How are people actually getting away with this, right? And it speaks to a culture that we've spiraled down into. stuff that I haven't seen before because I'm old. You know, and that comes to like another root cause, which separate from the lack of accountability among Travis Scott and his team, which is just like values as a whole. Like, what do we really value? I think that that's a question that really needs to be explored because, I mean, this is a wake-up call. It's not about like Travis Scott as a person. I mean, yes, we need to hold him and his team accountable. And yes, like, I hope that they grow conscience and end up doing the right thing and acknowledging their wrongdoing and acknowledging like that they knew the dangers and they didn't take the steps that they needed to take to prevent it. Like, I hope that that happens. It's not going to, but like, I could still hope, right? But also recognizing like, what the hell? Why are there people that continue to trample on others, like that like stepped on other people and didn't help them? I mean, I saw a video of a guy on YouTube that was actually saying, you know, I went into this and I knew it was kill or be killed. I had been to previous Travis Scott concerts, and you know, to the people that got trampled and that got hurt, like, you should have known. And it's like, what? Kill or be killed, dude. You're at a concert.